Hello everyone. Back again with film recaps. In this video, I'm going to recap one of the thriller suspense films from 2025, titled Holland. Before we get to the storyline, I'd like to wish everyone a happy and great day. Without further ado, let's get straight to the storyline. The movie begins in Holland, a small town in Michigan famous for its Dutch heritage and annual tulip festival. We meet our protagonist, Nancy van Groot, who is desperately searching through her jewelry boxes because one of her earrings is missing. She suspects their nanny stole it, so she demands the young girl to confess if she stole anything. But the nanny doesn't understand, and nervously apologizes because she ate their bacon instead. Nancy attempts to imply that she took something else as well, but the poor girl misses the hint. This enrages Nancy, and she fires her for not being truthful, leaving the nanny bewildered. After the poor girl leaves, Nancy's son, Harry, erupts in anger. He yells at his mom for being unfair, as the nanny was close to him. A frantic Harry storms to his room and calls his dad, Fred, who is an optometrist. He angrily complains about his mom, so Fred promises they'll talk when he gets home. Sometime later, Fred returns home, and takes Harry to his workshop. There, we see that Fred has meticulously constructed a miniature version of Holland, complete with a tiny railroad and scale model homes. As they work together, Fred informs Harry that women tend to overreact to everything. He urges his son to maintain the peace, and the boy nods in agreement. Later at dinner, Nancy vents to her husband about her stolen earrings, but he shows little interest. Fred then casually mentions he has to go to Frankenmuth for a work conference for one night. Nancy is not happy to hear this, but she remains silent. Harry then seizes the moment to apologize to his mother, which finally brings a smile to her face. The next day, we learn that Nancy works as a teacher at Holland High School. After finishing her classes, she meets up with her colleague, Dave, and vents about the nanny stealing her earrings. Dave is skeptical, questioning why she would steal just one earring and not both. But then Nancy shifts the conversation, and mentions her husband's conference. Dave wonders when it'll go, as he has an appointment with Fred this week to have his eyes checked.
You look cute. In glasses. You look like a professor.
Thank you.
Later that night, Nancy calls the motel where her husband is supposed to be staying. But strangely, the receptionist tells her no one is answering the phone inside the room. This leaves Nancy restless, and with her mind racing, she heads to her husband's workshop. As she rummages through one of the drawers, she finds a box of Polaroid film, but there are no pictures inside, which leaves her deeply suspicious. The next day, while going through her husband's pants, Nancy finds a parking ticket for a place called Madison. Her heart skips a beat, right when Fred returns home, so she questions why he didn't answer when she called last night, but Fred brushes it off, saying he must have been in the shower. Later at school, Nancy confides in Dave again, telling him she believes her husband is having an affair. She found Polaroid film, yet they don't even own a Polaroid camera. She also mentions the trip to Madison, revealing that Fred had lied about being in another town at the time. This shocks Dave, and he can't understand how a cheater like Fred could end up with someone as beautiful as Nancy. In the following days, doubts relentlessly torment Nancy, making it impossible for her to focus on anything. Things take a turn for the worse when Fred announces another business trip, this time for 3 days. But Nancy still doesn't say anything, as she doesn't have any solid proof at the moment. The next day, she meets Dave at a diner, where she comes up with a wild idea of breaking into her husband's office. Nancy is convinced that the Polaroid pictures must be hidden there, and is determined to find them. Since Dave's eye checkup is coming up, she asks him to sneak into the bathroom and open the window, but make it look like it's still closed, so she can get in later. Dave is hesitant at first, but eventually agrees when she flirtatiously touches his hand. That evening, Nancy tells Fred that she plans to go out with her friend, Gwen, this Friday. Her husband doesn't think much of it and agrees. The scene cuts to Friday afternoon, where Dave arrives for his eye checkup appointment. During the process, Fred casually mentions that he's noticed Dave's insurance is being covered by Holland High School. He points out that Dave must know his wife, who also works there. This makes Dave really nervous, but he lies, claiming he's new in town and doesn't know her. After some tests, Dave rushes to the bathroom, cracking the window just enough to appear shut. But the act freaks him out, especially when he spots a cop right outside the door. This unnerves him so deeply that he quickly walks away from the clinic, refusing any further tests. Some time later, Dave meets up with Nancy, and insists he's backing out of tonight's plan. He even makes up a story about having a date tonight. The excuse visibly stings Nancy, so Dave feels bad, and eventually admits he was lying. One thing leads to another, and they end up making out. That night, the two arrive outside Fred's office, and Dave helps Nancy get in while he stays out to keep watch. Fred, meanwhile, is with Harry at a diner, when he receives a phone call from Gwen. She frantically explains that her son's contact lens won't come out, and asks if they can come to his clinic urgently. Fred agrees without hesitation, and assures her he will be there. Elsewhere, we see Nancy at the office, where she manages to infiltrate a locker. And she is taken aback when she discovers an envelope stuffed with credit cards. Outside, Dave is in his car when he notices Fred greeting Gwen and her son. He immediately dials Nancy, who has just uncovered a strange Polaroid photo album. It's filled with eerie photos of houses, one showing a woman beside a sign that says Baloney Queen. Before she can dig deeper, Dave urges her to get out now. Nancy then hears Fred's voice outside, forcing her to escape through the office window. Later, after finishing the checkup on Gwen's son, Fred casually asks Gwen about the supposed trip with Nancy. However, she claims that they never planned anything like that, leaving Fred frozen in shock. Elsewhere, we see Nancy passionately making out with Dave. Returning to Fred, he steps into his office, and is stunned to see a piece of his wife's jewelry lying on the floor. The next morning, Nancy calls her husband's credit card company, and learns that he made an expensive purchase at a jewelry store. Doubts flood her mind, and she can't help but wonder if it's for his mistress. Next, her eyes are drawn to a jar of button containers, and there, she eventually finds her lost earring, leaving her stunned. Moreover, upon entering her room, Nancy finds a jewelry box as a gift from her husband. Soon, Fred arrives, and reveals that he knew she didn't go with Gwen last night. He doesn't ask where Nancy was, but calmly explains the importance of maintaining peace in the family. He wants to go back to the way things were before, and asks for her trust. Nancy, overcome with guilt, apologizes for her actions, and promises to be good from now on. In the following days, Nancy does her best to repair her strained relationship with her husband. She pretends to maintain the facade of a perfect family, but can't stop thinking about Dave. One evening, Nancy finally snaps, and musters the courage to call Dave. She tearfully confesses that she's ready to leave her husband, as she feels suffocated in this marriage. Dave is touched, but he warns her that if she leaves Fred for him, they will be judged by the entire town, and she could lose Harry. He thus suggests they first gather strong evidence of Fred's affair to use against him. Nancy is thrilled by the idea, and agrees without hesitation. Days later, Fred leaves for another trip, and Nancy arranges for one of her friends to look after Harry. She and Dave then follow her husband, and watch him buy multiple items on the way. After hours of driving, they finally notice him making a stop and entering a hotel. Dave follows him inside, while Nancy's phone vibrates with a text message from her husband, revealing that he is in room 307. Afterward, Dave follows Fred to a bar, while Nancy, posing as his wife at the reception, manages to get the room key. She then sneaks into the room. She begins rifling through the items Fred purchased in the afternoon, but is shocked to find a bag containing a pair of handcuffs, men's underwear, and dog treats. And so, she quickly snaps pictures of the items. At the bar, Fred prepares to leave, so Dave strikes up a conversation and invites him for a drink. But Fred doesn't recognize him from their earlier meeting, so he politely declines the offer. After he leaves, Dave immediately calls Nancy, prompting her to put the items back in place, and rush out of the room. Later, Nancy shows Dave the pictures she took, and is convinced that Fred is into some bizarre kink. The two then share a kiss, and spend the night in the car. The next morning, Nancy wakes up, and realizes she needs to return home to pick up Harry. But Dave believes the photos are insufficient evidence, and decides to stay behind to catch Fred with another woman. Nancy likes the idea, so she heads back to the town alone. Upon returning home, she inspects her husband's miniature town, and shockingly spots the name Lacey Ann for Bologna Queen written on one of the model houses. Nancy immediately searches online for Lacey Ann, and manages to find her number. But when she calls, she's horrified to learn that Lacey went missing 3 years ago, and her body was later found. Elsewhere, Dave sees Fred exit the hotel, and immediately proceeds to follow him. Next, Nancy goes through her husband's architectural designs, and finds a series of numbers written on the back. She cross-references them with the parking ticket she found in his pocket, and realizes they're zip codes of places Fred has visited. A desperate Nancy then heads to the library, where she searches for each zip code. But a cold shiver runs down her spine when she uncovers a series of crime reports. It turns out that multiple women have been reported mysteriously dead or missing in each of those areas. Meanwhile, Dave has followed Fred to a house deep in the woods. But he's shocked to see Fred greeting a woman in her house, and Fred proceeds to give several dogs their treats. Dave carefully captures every moment for evidence, and also decides to enter the cabin, determined to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, Nancy realizes just how dangerous her husband is, and frantically tries to call Dave to warn him, but he doesn't pick up. Dave, on the other hand, hears groaning from a room, and quietly heads there with his camera. As he opens the door, his stomach twists with horror as he sees Fred mercilessly slitting the poor woman's throat. But then, during the struggle, Fred attempts to choke Dave, but the latter injures him with the knife and runs away. Despite his bleeding injury, Fred tackles Dave fiercely, crashing them both through the window. Here, Fred glares at Dave and coldly says, "So you do know my wife?" Dave then notices he has stabbed Fred in the gut, and apologizes before sprinting away, but the scary husband isn't about to give up. Dave tries to escape, when Fred once again shows up on the lake dock. But before Fred can strike, Dave pulls out the knife, causing Fred to lose a tremendous amount of blood, before collapsing into the water, and dying. The next day, Dave returns to Holland and meets Nancy, who is frantic over what she's just uncovered. Dave confirms that Fred is a killer, but he reassures her that she has nothing to fear, because Fred will never come back. He tells her that he confronted Fred with the pictures, and forced him to disappear from their lives for good. Dave then suggests they and Harry leave the town right now, but Nancy argues that they can't just vanish, it would look too suspicious. She proposes they wait until the big tulip festival in town, and promises they'll leave afterward. In the following days, they both try to carry on with their daily lives. Nancy is constantly tormented by the fear that Fred might come back, while Dave is haunted by nightmares of what happened. One evening, he digs up a gun buried in his backyard, preparing for whatever horrifying event might come next. Days later, the day of the Tulip Festival finally arrives, and the entire town is gathered to celebrate. Nancy also shows up, but her moment of calm is shattered when the neighbors inform her that her husband has returned from his trip. A spooked Nancy claims it's impossible, but the neighbors swear they saw Fred earlier. During the festival, Harry gives a dance performance with the other kids, bringing some joy to the day. Afterward, Nancy searches for her son, only to run into Dave. He suddenly grabs her hand, claiming that Fred is at the festival and they need to leave, but Nancy angrily demands that he let go of her and approaches Harry. The mother and son then rush to a motel, where Nancy locks all of the doors and windows for safety. Soon, Dave also arrives at the motel door, and demands that Nancy let him in. This annoys her, so she quickly locks Harry in a room, urging him not to come out under any circumstances. Nancy hesitates to open the front door, so a desperate Dave spills the entire truth. He explains how he witnessed Fred brutally killing a woman, and how they fought afterward. He was convinced Fred had drowned in the lake, but somehow the man has returned alive. Upon hearing the truth, Nancy finally opens the door, and she is angry that he lied to her. Dave is determined to make things right, and decides to tell the cops everything. But Nancy stops him, as she believes it will only ruin Harry's life. The two begin tussling for the phone, during which Nancy accidentally injures Dave in the head. After apologizing, A worried Nancy then rushes to find her son, but he is nowhere to be seen. And so, she steps outside, but to her surprise, she sees Harry calmly hanging out with his dad by the lakeside. Fred asks Harry to go wait in the car, assuring him they'll head home soon. Up next, Fred calmly states that he's deeply disappointed in her actions. He claims he's never crossed a line in their marriage, but she has. However, he suddenly insists that the man who committed those murders isn't the real him. His real self is with his family, and he suggests that they hit the reset button and resume their perfect family life. Realizing that resistance could make things worse, Nancy gets into the car with her family. But just moments after Fred starts driving, she states that Harry hasn't buckled his seatbelt, and they need to pull over. Fred tries to refuse, but Nancy forces him to stop the car, and screams at Harry to run. After this, Nancy pulls out a gun and aims it at her husband. But he calmly tries to convince her that without him, Harry's life will fall apart, and he will likely end up in foster care. Regardless, Nancy refuses to fall for his tricks. And then this happens.
You deserve this.
Mom? Mom!
Here we notice that Nancy has badly injured Fred's face. Still, the psychopath isn't willing to give up and violently tries to choke his wife to death. Despite this, Nancy manages to grab one of her heels, and mercilessly begins beating Fred with it, until he finally collapses dead in a bloody mess. After the nightmare ends, Nancy rushes back to the motel, but Dave is nowhere to be found. The movie ends with Nancy and her son, alone in a world that will never be the same again, forever haunted by the horrors they've endured. Okay guys, thanks for watching. See you again in the next video.